There's something deeply unsettling about staying in a stranger's home. You tell yourself it's safe, it's normal. You read the reviews, scroll through the pictures, and trust that nothing bad could happen. But sometimes, behind those smiling host profiles and perfectly staged rooms, there are secrets. Things you were never meant to find. Tonight, we'll explore 3 true scary Airbnb stories, quiet tales of isolation, unease, and the moments that make your heart freeze in the middle of the night. So, turn off the lights. Lie back. And listen closely. Because some doors should never be opened. And some Airbnbs should never have been booked at all. Our first story takes us to a quiet stretch of countryside, where one traveler thought they'd found the perfect escape. A cozy cabin on Old Pine Road, peaceful, private, and surrounded by endless trees. But when night fell, and the forest grew silent, something began to move outside. Something that didn't want them there. This is the Airbnb on Old Pine Road. Story 1, The Airbnb on Old Pine Road. It was the end of summer when I decided to take a short weekend trip by myself, a kind of quiet escape before work got hectic again. I wasn't looking for anything fancy, just a small place surrounded by nature where I could unwind and read a bit. I found an Airbnb about 2 hours from home, nestled in the hills outside a small town called Hollow Creek. The pictures showed a cozy cabin with pine walls, a small deck, and a view of the forest. It looked peaceful, maybe too peaceful. The host's name was Elaine, and her profile picture showed an older woman with kind eyes and silver hair pulled into a bun. The reviews were mostly positive. A few mentioned how quiet the area was, how good the Wi-Fi turned out to be, and how friendly Elaine was when greeting guests. There were 2 reviews, though, that stood out to me. They weren't bad, exactly, just odd. One said, "Place was great, but felt like someone kept walking around upstairs at night. Probably the wind." The other read, "Lovely host, but next time I'll bring earplugs. Old houses make strange sounds." I didn't think much of it. Old houses do creak, and it was cheap for what it offered, $80 a night. I booked 2 nights. Arrival. The drive up was beautiful. The road wound between thick stands of pine and maple, and the air smelled like sap and rain. It had just stormed the night before, so the pavement was slick and dark, glistening with mist that hadn't yet lifted. When I reached Old Pine Road, my GPS told me I was about a mile away. The trees grew thicker there, leaning in on both sides, and the light dimmed as if the forest swallowed the afternoon sun. The cabin came into view suddenly, small, with a slanted roof and a porch that wrapped around the front. There was an old rocking chair beside the door, and flower pots hung from the railing, though the flowers were mostly wilted. Elaine came out to greet me before I even parked. She was just like her picture, kind-looking, small-framed, wearing a thick sweater even though the day was warm. "Long drive?" she asked, smiling. "Not too bad," I said. "Beautiful out here." "Oh yes," she replied softly. "Peaceful place. You'll sleep well." She gave me a quick tour of the cabin, the kitchen, the small living room with a wood stove, the narrow staircase that led to a loft bedroom upstairs. Everything smelled faintly of pine and something older, like the faint trace of smoke and damp wood that never quite goes away in country homes. Before she left, she handed me the keys and said, if you need anything, I live just next door. That little house across the trees there." She pointed, and through the branches I could barely make out another small cabin, gray and half hidden. "Thanks," I said. "I'll be fine, I think." She smiled again, but for a brief second, her eyes didn't seem as soft. It wasn't anger, or unkindness. It was something unreadable, like she was remembering something. Then she turned and walked back toward her house. First night. The evening was quiet. Too quiet. I cooked myself a small meal, opened a book, and sat on the deck until the forest turned black. The only sounds were the crickets and the occasional rustle of branches. Around 10 p.m., I went upstairs to bed. The loft was small, with one window overlooking the trees. The air was cool, and the sheets smelled freshly washed. I remember thinking how comfortable it all felt, safe, even. Then, sometime after midnight, I woke up. At first, I didn't know why. The forest was still silent, except for a faint tick-tick-tick sound. I thought it might be rain, but when I looked out the window, the sky was clear. The sound came again, a steady tapping, like footsteps on wood. It was coming from downstairs. I froze, listening. Tap, tap, pause, tap tap. Old houses make noises, I reminded myself. The reviews said that too. Wood expands, pipes shift. But it didn't sound random. It sounded measured. I sat up slowly, every nerve alert. The tapping grew faint, then stopped altogether. After a long moment, I decided to check. I didn't turn on the main lights, just used my phone's flashlight as I crept down the narrow stairs. The living room looked exactly as I left it. The kitchen was empty. The door was still locked. Still, the sound lingered in my head. I checked my watch, 12:47 a.m. Maybe it was the wind. Maybe Elaine's house next door made noises that carried across. I went back upstairs, but I didn't fall asleep for a long time. The second day. In the morning, the unease faded. Sunlight poured through the window, and the cabin looked warm and harmless again. I made coffee and sat on the deck, watching mist drift between the trees. Elaine came by mid-morning with a basket of muffins. "Just checking in," she said. "Everything comfortable?" "Very," I told her. Then I hesitated. "I did hear some noises last night. Maybe the house settling." She looked thoughtful for a moment. "Ah. Yes, it does that sometimes." Her tone was calm, but there was something rehearsed about it, like she'd said the same line too many times before. After she left, I decided to go into town. I spent most of the day wandering around small antique shops, a diner where the waitress called everyone honey. It was almost evening when I got back. The air felt heavier that night, and when I stepped out of my car, I noticed something I hadn't before: a small door on the side of the cabin, half hidden behind some overgrown shrubs. It looked like a basement entrance, though it was padlocked shut. I remember thinking it was strange that Elaine hadn't mentioned it during the tour. But I shrugged it off and went inside. That night, as I settled into bed again, I couldn't shake the image of that locked door. Second night. I woke up around 2:15 a.m. to a different sound, not footsteps this time, but a faint creak, like a door opening slowly somewhere below me. The air felt colder. My heart started pounding, that half-awake panic when your mind isn't sure if what it heard was real. Then came another sound, the quiet rhythm of someone breathing. I held my breath, straining to listen. It was soft, almost delicate, but it was inside the cabin. I reached for my phone and turned on the flashlight again. Nothing. Just shadows. I forced myself to stand, my hands shaking, and crept down the stairs one step at a time. Halfway down, the breathing stopped. The house was silent again, thick, suffocating silence. I checked the kitchen, the living room, even the bathroom. The front door was still locked. When I passed by the side window, though, something caught my eye. Outside, near the trees, a faint light flickered like the beam of a flashlight moving slowly across the yard. Someone was out there. I ducked back, peering through the curtain as carefully as I could. The light swayed, then disappeared. I waited. 5 minutes. 10. Nothing. After that, I locked the doors again, pushed a chair against the handle just in case, and stayed awake until the faint blue of dawn began to show through the trees. The discovery. By morning, I'd made up my mind I was leaving early. I didn't care if I lost the second night's fee. I started packing my things, trying to convince myself that maybe Elaine had been checking on the property, that maybe she'd dropped something outside. But before I could finish, I noticed something that froze me in place. There, on the wooden floor by the staircase, were footprints. They were faint, dusty, as if someone had walked barefoot through the house. The prints led from the base of the stairs toward the kitchen and then to the side wall. I followed them, trembling, until they stopped in front of a narrow panel near the fridge. It didn't look like much, just a section of wall with slightly different wood grain. But when I pressed my hand against it, it gave a little. A hidden door. Behind it was a short, steep set of steps leading down the basement. The same place I'd seen padlocked outside. My heart thudded in my chest as I leaned down and shined my phone's light into the dark. There was something down there, a mattress, a small table, and what looked like an old camera on a tripod. The smell hit me next, mildew, dust, and something faintly metallic. I stumbled back, slammed the panel shut, and ran outside. Elaine's house was quiet, her curtains drawn. I didn't even bother saying goodbye. I got in my car and drove until I reached the next gas station. Aftermath. I tried to tell myself I'd overreacted. Maybe the basement was just old storage. Maybe the camera was for security. But later that week, I got a message from Airbnb support. It said the host, Elaine, had been suspended pending investigation. I didn't ask for details, but curiosity got the better of me. A quick search of Old Pine Road, Hollow Creek brought up a small local news article from a few years earlier. A tenant had gone missing from one of the properties in that area, a young woman traveling alone. The case had gone cold. The address wasn't listed in the article, but the photo in the background showed the same slanted roof, the same pine trees crowding close. Epilogue. Sometimes, late at night, I think about that house. I picture the quiet loft, the smell of pine, the soft creaking of old wood. And then I think about those footprints and the sound of breathing in the dark. I still stay in Airbnb sometimes. I still scroll through the pictures and reviews like everyone else. But now, before I book, I look for more than good Wi-Fi or clean sheets. I look at the walls, the corners, the shadows in the photos, and I wonder what's behind them. Because some hosts don't just rent you a room. They're watching it, too. Our next story begins in the city. A young couple found what seemed like a perfect deal, a small house, charming and cheap, hosted by a kind older woman. But when they noticed a second key hanging by the door, one they were told never to touch, the house began to reveal its true nature. This is the house with two keys. Story 2: The House with Two Keys. I've always been a light sleeper. That's one of the reasons I started renting quiet Airbnbs instead of staying in hotels when I traveled for work. Hotels are too noisy, doors slamming, people laughing in hallways, televisions bleeding through the walls. But Airbnbs, they felt private. Safer, in a way. At least, that's what I thought until last spring. Arrival. It was early April when I flew into Portland for a short project. My company had rented me an Airbnb outside the city, about 30 minutes west in a quiet neighborhood surrounded by trees. The listing was called the Craftsman Cottage, a small, restored 1940s house with white shutters and a red front door. The photos looked charming: a big bay window, a stone path through a garden, and a cozy living room with a fireplace. The host, Aaron, had excellent reviews. Every single one described him as helpful, respectful, and thoughtful. There was one odd detail in the listing, though. Under check-in instructions, it said, "2 keys provided. Please keep both during your stay. One is for the main door, and the other is for emergency use only." I didn't think much of it at the time. Maybe it was for a back gate, or a garage. Aaron messaged me the day before my arrival. "House is all set. I won't be home when you arrive, but let yourself in. If you need anything, I live just a few minutes away." When I got there, it was drizzling lightly, the kind of slow Oregon rain that never really stops. The yard was neat, the air smelled like wet pine, and a motion light flicked on as I pulled into the driveway. The house looked just like the pictures, except older somehow. The paint was chipped around the door frame, and one of the shutters hung slightly crooked. The keys were waiting in a small lockbox. Just as described, there were 2, one brass, one darker and older, tied together with a small piece of twine. Inside, the place was spotless. The hardwood floors gleamed, the air smelled faintly of lemon cleaner, and a soft ticking came from the old wall clock above the fireplace. There was even a note on the kitchen counter in Aaron's neat handwriting. "Welcome. Please enjoy your stay. Wi-Fi password on the fridge. Don't worry about the noises, old houses have old bones." I smiled. It felt warm, almost personal. The first night. The first evening was quiet. I made tea, unpacked, and sat by the window listening to rain tap against the glass. The street was empty, just a long stretch of trees and the occasional car passing by in the distance. By midnight, I was ready for bed. I locked the front door, double-checked the windows, and turned off the lights. Somewhere around 2 a.m., a sound woke me up. At first, it was faint, a soft click, like a latch or hinge shifting. Then another sound, creak. It came from the living room. Half asleep, I told myself it was nothing. Maybe the floorboards expanding, maybe the old house breathing. I'd heard that phrase before. But when I rolled over, I noticed something that made my stomach twist. The door to my bedroom closed when I went to sleep was open. Not wide. Just a few inches. Enough for a sliver of darkness to show through the crack. I stared at it for a long time, waiting for it to move again. It didn't. Finally, I got up, heart pounding, and pushed it shut. Then I locked it from the inside. I didn't sleep much after that. Day 2. In the morning, everything looked normal again. I convinced myself the latch had just been loose. The house was old, after all. Aaron sent me a message. Hope everything's comfortable. Let me know if the weather's too cold. I can adjust the thermostat remotely. I thanked him, mentioned the door creaking open, and joked about the house having a mind of its own. He replied, "Ah, yes. That happens sometimes. The air pressure changes when it rains. Perfectly normal." It was a reasonable answer. I worked most of the day remotely from the dining table, then went out for dinner at a nearby diner. When I came back, it was nearly dark. That's when I noticed something new. The second key, the old dark one, was missing from the hook where I'd hung the pair. I checked my pockets, my bag, the kitchen counter. Nothing. Only the brass key remained. I was sure I hadn't taken it anywhere. But maybe it had fallen somewhere, I thought. Maybe I'd dropped it when unpacking. Still, something about it unsettled me. Second night. That night, the rain came harder. I remember lying in bed, listening to the steady drumming on the roof, the soft groan of the wind against the window panes. Around 1:30, I heard it again. Click. Then a slow, deliberate creak. I froze. It was the same sound as before, but this time, I could tell it wasn't the bedroom door. It was the front door. I sat up and strained to listen. The rain covered most sounds, but I could still make out faint movement, like footsteps on hardwood. Someone was inside. I reached for my phone, but my hand was shaking too hard to type the passcode. Then I heard the footsteps again, soft, careful, crossing the living room. They stopped just outside my bedroom door. For a moment, the only sound was the rain. Then, so quietly I almost didn't believe it, came a slow turn of the doorknob. The lock held. Whoever was on the other side tried again, more pressure this time, a faint metallic rattle. Then silence. I sat there, barely breathing, until dawn started to gray the window. The missing key. The next morning, I checked every inch of the house. The front door was still locked. The windows were latched. No sign of a break-in. But the rug near the entryway was slightly crooked. And the faint, damp imprint of a shoe stained the wood just beside it. When I looked closer, I saw something else, a small, folded piece of paper on the floor near the door. It was torn from a notebook, with shaky handwriting that said only, "You weren't supposed to lock it." That was when I called Airbnb. The representative was polite but confused. They said they'd contact the host and investigate. Then they asked me to find another place for the night. I packed up immediately, stuffed everything into my suitcase, and left. As I backed out of the driveway, I saw Aaron standing across the street, half hidden behind a tree. He didn't wave. He just watched. Aftermath. I checked into a hotel downtown that night. The moment I got into the room, I deadbolted the door and finally exhaled. Later that evening, Airbnb support called me back. The representative sounded uneasy. "We've suspended the listing," she said. "And, just to confirm, you said there were 2 keys, correct?" "Yes," I said. "One brass, one darker." "The host shouldn't have had 2 active keys," she said slowly. "Only the guest key should open the front door. The secondary key was supposed to be disabled months ago." My stomach dropped. "We found out Aaron was renting the property under someone else's account," she continued. "The actual homeowner lives out of state. She's filing a report." I didn't know what to say. I asked if anyone else had reported similar issues. The rep hesitated before replying. "There was one other complaint," she said quietly. "A guest last winter claimed someone entered the house at night. We thought it was a misunderstanding." 2 weeks later. 2 weeks after I got home, a package arrived at my apartment. No return address, just my name written neatly on the front. Inside was a single key. Old. Dark. The same one that had gone missing. There was no note. I threw it away the same day, but sometimes I still dream about that quiet house in the rain. I dream of the sound of that lock turning, the faint pressure on the door. And sometimes, when I'm half awake at night, I think I hear that click again just once, soft and deliberate, like someone testing the knob. I tell myself it's the pipes, the wind, the usual things people tell themselves. But deep down, I know better. Because that house had 2 keys. And someone still has the other one. Our final story tonight follows a traveler who rented a quiet guest house by the coast. The host was polite, the place was spotless, almost too spotless. But there was one door upstairs always locked. And when the guest finally found out why, it was already too late. This is the locked room above the garage. Story 3, The Locked Room Above the Garage. I've stayed in dozens of Airbnb cabins, apartments, even a converted barn once, but only one ever made me feel truly unsafe. It wasn't haunted, at least not in the supernatural sense. But it felt like it was keeping a secret. This happened last winter, in late January, when I was traveling for a photography assignment. I needed somewhere quiet near the mountains, a place with enough space to set up my gear and edit photos between shoots. I found a listing titled Rustic Guest House with Mountain Views. The pictures showed a small 1-story cottage behind a larger house. A cozy fireplace, an open deck, and a wall of windows facing the forest. It looked perfect. Affordable, $265 a night. The host's name was Henry, and his profile said he was a retired teacher who enjoyed meeting travelers. His reviews were mixed. Some said he was friendly and helpful, others mentioned he was a bit too present. One guest even wrote, "Felt like Henry was always nearby." Nice guy, though. I brushed it off. I'd met plenty of hosts who liked to chat. Arrival. The drive up took nearly 4 hours. By the time I got there, the sun had already slipped behind the ridge, and everything was soaked in that deep blue twilight that feels colder than night itself. The main house sat up a small slope, its porch light glowing faintly through the fog. The guest house was a few yards down, near the tree line, with its own gravel path. When I pulled up, Henry was already waiting outside, tall, thin, maybe in his late 60s, wearing a flannel shirt and a friendly smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "You made it," he called out. "Hope the drive wasn't too rough." "Not bad," I said, shaking his hand. His grip was cold. He walked me through the guest house. Everything looked tidy. The smell of lemon cleaner and wood smoke filled the air. The space was small but comfortable: a kitchenette, a living area, a bedroom at the back. Before he left, he said, "You'll hear me moving around sometimes. I'm just next door in the main house. If you need anything, knock on the side door." I nodded, but something about the way he said "you'll hear me moving around" made my stomach tighten. As he stepped outside, I noticed another door at the back of the cottage, one that led upstairs. A narrow, unlit staircase disappearing into shadow. "What's up there?" I asked. "Oh, that." He gave a short laugh. "Just storage. Old junk. Locked, anyway." He jingled a set of keys in his hand, a lot of keys, all different shapes and colors. "Don't worry about it." Then he smiled again and left. First night. The first night was uneventful. I unpacked, made soup, and worked on my laptop until past midnight. Occasionally, I heard faint thumps from the direction of the main house, probably Henry moving around, like he'd said. Around 1 a.m., though, I heard something closer. A single, heavy footstep directly above me. I froze. There shouldn't have been anyone up there. That was the locked storage room. Another step followed, slow and deliberate. Then silence. I waited a full minute before standing. The air felt heavy, as if the sound had pressed itself into the walls. I told myself maybe it was the building settling. Old wood moves, especially when temperatures drop. Still, when I finally went to bed, I left the lights on. The second day. In the morning, everything looked normal again. Sunlight cut through the fog, and birds hopped across the frosted grass outside my window. I ran into Henry while I was loading my camera gear into the car. He was stacking firewood by his porch. "Sleep okay?" he asked, smiling. "Mostly," I said. "Think I heard something walking upstairs in the guest house last night." "You sure no one else is staying here?" He looked up sharply, then laughed. "Nah. Probably a squirrel in the attic. They get in sometimes. I'll check it later." He didn't check, though. At least not while I was there. When I came back that evening, a small plate of cookies sat on the counter. No note, but I assumed he'd dropped them off. That night, I tried to ignore the noises, the faint creaks, the soft scraping from above. But around 3 a.m., I woke up again to footsteps. Only this time, they didn't stop. They moved slowly across the ceiling, heel to toe, steady and rhythmic. I lay perfectly still, counting them. 1, 2, 3, pause. 4, 5, 6. Then silence. I stared at the ceiling until dawn. Third day. By the third morning, I was exhausted. My eyes burned from lack of sleep, and even coffee didn't help much. When Henry came by later, I asked about the attic again. He gave me a polite smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Don't worry," he said softly. "It's locked." "Always locked?" I didn't press further, but something about his tone chilled me. It wasn't reassurance, it was warning. That evening, I took a walk around the property before sunset, hoping the fresh air would clear my head. The main house looked quiet, no lights on inside. As I passed the back of the guest house, I noticed something I hadn't before, a small window high up on the wall, part of that locked upstairs room. It was covered from the inside by what looked like cardboard or black plastic. I don't know why, but I felt a wave of nausea looking at it. When I went back inside, I noticed something else. The plate of cookies was gone. I hadn't eaten them that night. I tried not to panic. I told myself Henry had probably come in to tidy up or check something. Still, the idea of someone entering while I slept made my skin crawl. I wedged a chair under the doorknob and kept my phone beside me. Around midnight, I heard faint shuffling again, not above me this time, but behind the bedroom wall. It was soft, like fabric brushing against wood, then a quiet click. The light above my bed flickered. Then I heard breathing. Slow. Unsteady. So close it felt like it was inside the room. I sat up, heart pounding, listening hard. The sound came from the corner near the ceiling where a thin vent cover sat loosely screwed in place. Behind it, in the darkness, something shifted. I grabbed my keys, ran outside barefoot, and sprinted up the path toward the main house. Confrontation. Henry opened the door almost immediately, as if he'd been expecting me. "Everything all right?" he asked calmly. "There's someone upstairs in that room," I said, breathless. "I heard them. Breathing, moving. I'm calling the police." His smile faded, replaced by something colder, almost resigned. "You shouldn't have heard that," he murmured. Before I could respond, he stepped outside and closed the door behind him. "You need to go. Now." I didn't argue. I ran to my car, locked the doors, and sped down the mountain road until I had service again. I called 911 and gave them the address. The dispatcher told me to wait at a nearby gas station until officers arrived. The investigation. 2 hours later, I got a call from a deputy. They'd gone to the property. Henry was there, calm, cooperative, insisting it was all a misunderstanding. But when they checked the locked upstairs room, they found signs that someone had been living there. A mattress. Food wrappers. A pile of clothes. And a small hole cut into the wall, one that lined up perfectly with the vent above my bed. The deputy told me they hadn't found anyone else on the property. When I asked about Henry, she paused. "He's not the owner," she said finally. "The homeowner rents the property out remotely. Henry's been managing it for her." She didn't know he was living there full-time. Airbnb suspended the listing within 24 hours. Aftermath. 4 weeks after, I couldn't sleep properly. Every creak, every hum of the heater sent my heart racing. A month later, I got an email from the county sheriff's office saying Henry was being investigated for trespassing and unlawful entry, but no arrest had been made. I tried not to think about it anymore. But one evening, while cleaning out my camera bag, I found something that made my blood run cold: a small SD card tucked in the side pocket. It wasn't mine. I plugged it into my laptop. There were only 3 files. Each one was a short video, recorded from what looked like a hidden camera. The first showed me unpacking my bags. The second, me asleep under the covers. The third was darker, grainy, filmed from inside a vent. The timestamp read 2:17 a.m., the night I'd run out. And in that video, just before I sat up, a faint reflection caught the camera's lens: a man's face, watching quietly from the shadows above. Epilogue. I stopped staying in Airbnbs after that. Now, whenever I travel, I book hotels: noisy, crowded, fluorescent hotels. I'd rather listen to strangers through thin walls than wonder who's behind them. Sometimes, though, when I'm alone late at night and the pipes groan or the ceiling creaks, I still think about that house in the mountains. I picture that narrow staircase, the locked door, the plastic-covered window. And I wonder if Henry was ever really alone up there. Or if someone else is still in that room, quiet, patient, waiting for the next guest to check in. Thank you for listening. These were 3 true scary Airbnb stories, each a reminder that even the most ordinary places can hide something dark. When you travel, remember to trust your instincts. Read the reviews, lock the doors, and if something feels wrong, leave. Because sometimes, the walls are listening. And sometimes, the host was never truly gone. Good night. And sleep well. If you can.